Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Family Heirlooms. During the summer of 2023, I set out to find the best beans for my garden and my zone, and also my favorite in terms of flavor. And I've dubbed it the quest for the greatest bean. So I grew an inordinate amount of beans last year, and I focused mainly on snap beans, which were also bush beans. Pole snap beans can be really, really great varieties. I find them a little bit annoying in terms of making sure that all the beans get found and picked. And also, I don't enjoy having to wait a little longer to get them. Everybody has their own preference on this. So, for my needs and my garden, I tend to focus on bush beans for my snap beans. And I just want to kind of go over what varieties I grew, what I liked and disliked about each of them, and what come out on top as the favorite beans overall. So for green variety beans, I grew two different kinds, one called Zumbro Falls and the other called Top Crop. So Zumbro Falls is a variety I had not heard of before. I got it through a bean collector's window from Russ Crow, and this variety gave really wide, flat beans, a lot like a Romano type bean. They weren't a particularly heavy producer. However, the flavor of these beans was phenomenal. They were really super sweet, almost to the point of being like a sugar snap pea. And that was something I really, really enjoyed about this variety. Top Crop was definitely one of the top producers in the garden in 2023. It produced, I think, three crops of beans, and the beans were quite large, as you can see. My biggest complaint on these was that they were almost too fat. I have a special slicing machine that I use to make a fried green bean dish that my family loves, and these were actually too big to fit in that machine. The flavor is definitely an old-timey bean flavor that we really enjoyed. So, other than the beans being a little too big for the machine, these were a very, very nice bean overall. So, for wax beans, I ended up trying 7 different varieties from a number of different sources. Cherokee wax has been my standby wax bean. However, when I moved from southern Iowa a little bit further north, it seemed to not be doing as well. And so I wanted to kind of get a comparison to see if perhaps it was just that particular variety or if wax beans in general just didn't like this area. I was initially attracted to the goldenrod bean because it was touted as the yellowest bean available on the market, and it did not disappoint in that regard. These were a very, very yellow bean. They produced really well. They had a really nice flavor. And overall, these were a very, very enjoyable bean. I do think I got two crops off of this variety, so they gave us quite a bit of beans to work with over the course of the summer. Cherokee wax has been my go-to wax bean for many years. It is definitely one that produced very well for me in my previous garden. It just doesn't seem to be happy in the garden that I have now. So this is part of why I trialed it against so many other wax beans. And in terms of color, the color is just not great compared to some of the other wax beans. It sort of falls short. And the production was pretty average and the flavor is really good, but it just didn't seem to add up as well as some of the other beans that we grew this year. Kishwaukee yellow was definitely the standout of the wax beans in terms of production. These produced, I think, 3 different crops over the course of the summer. The bean size was very nice. They didn't get too big around while still having quite a bit of length. And the yellow color was quite nice. Flavor on these was really good, just a nice beany flavor. And it was one of my favorite of the wax beans. Rock d'Or was definitely more of a fillet type bean. The pods were very long and thin and delicate, which is not something that I generally look for in a bean. The production on this was also not great, which added to the fact that the beans are so delicate, didn't add up to a lot of bean mass overall. Coloration just wasn't great on these either. They never really got yellow. This is almost more of a lime green or highlighter yellow kind of color. So Rock d'Or was definitely toward the bottom of the list in terms of the wax beans. Pencil pod was very, very similar to the Cherokee wax. I will point out Pencil pod does have two different strains. There is a white seeded strain and a black seeded strain. The ones that I grew were the white seeded strain. I'm not 100% sure what kind of differences there are in terms of growth habit, flavor, coloration from the white to the black seed, but I will just say I grew the white seeded variety in terms of color and production and flavor, all very, very similar to Cherokee wax, a little less production than Cherokee wax. Gold Rush did very well in terms of production, and the coloration was quite nice as well. When it came to flavor on this particular bean variety, it just was not there for me. I did not enjoy the flavor of this bean at all. So that was a definite downside to this one, is that the flavor just wasn't great. Rocquencourt was a late player to the game. I did do a summer planting on this variety rather than a spring planting, which could account for some of the issues that I saw with it. The coloration of the beans was nowhere near what you see on this package. They were more along the lines of the Gold Rush, not this yellow color that you see here. These plants also ended up being a half runner or semi runner type bean, which made them a little bit unruly, and the flavor on these just wasn't great either. For purple beans, I ended up growing 6 different varieties. There is a little caveat in here in that the Celine bean is not really the same as the other beans. Celine is the first purple wax bean on the market. The rest of these are all purple green beans. Purple beans are definitely a fun variety to grow in the garden. They're very easy to see when you're doing picking. One of the biggest drawbacks to these beans is that when you cook them, they do not stay purple. They do end up turning a very dark green, basically the color that they are on the inside. In the case of the Celine, it ended up being a light green, dark green, yellow kind of color. So, as I stated before, Celine is the first purple wax bean to hit the market. This variety is definitely more of a fillet type bean, very thin pods, very delicate beans. These did not do super well in my garden, but I believe part of that is where I planted them. They were in a damp part of the garden and didn't seem to enjoy that very much. The coloring on these is really fun, really amazing. It's almost a magenta color more than a purple color, and the flavor on these was quite nice too. So these were definitely one that I enjoyed growing. Amethyst beans were definitely not one of my favorite of the purple beans. As you can see from this picture, there were a lot of misshapen beans, and the coloring on them was not consistent. They would stay green a very, very long time, and it seemed like if they were in the shade, they would never get the purple coloring at all, which was a definite drawback for me on these. Production was not great on these either, and the flavor wasn't outstanding, certainly not enough to encourage me to want to try this variety again. So Amethyst was definitely lower on the list of the purple varieties. Purple Teepee had consistently good purple coloration regardless of sunlight, and the production on this was quite nice. Flavor was also good. We did get a little bit of misshapen beans in terms of the curving. I do believe part of that was due to inconsistent watering, which can happen to any bean, but this was one of my favorite of the purple beans. Velour has been my go-to purple bean for a couple years now. It was actually one of the first purple fillet beans on the market, which means it is one of those thinner, more delicate beans. Production on the velour plants has always been phenomenal. However, because it is a fillet bean, even though you're getting a large number of beans, you're not getting a whole lot in terms of weight. So it doesn't really add up to being a whole lot of food. Coloration on these is gorgeous. However, it is inconsistent at times. As you can see from the picture, they don't always have that consistently purple coloring. And flavor on these is quite good as well. I've always enjoyed growing this bean, and it has definitely been one of my favorite purple beans. Royal Burgundy is definitely a purple variety many gardeners are familiar with. The purple coloration does lean more toward a red color, as the name Burgundy implies. The coloring on them was very, very consistent, a very deep, beautiful purple color, and the production on them was really nice as well. This was one I really did not enjoy the flavor on. I don't know how to describe it. It just wasn't a flavor I enjoyed at all. Purple King was another late player to the game, being a summer planting rather than a spring planting. This one, similar to the Rocquencourt, ended up being the half runner variety, which made it a bit unruly. Coloration on the beans was quite nice. However, they did not get very big and they did not have a great flavor. Tanya's pink pod, as the name suggests, is a pink bean. I got this variety from a bean collector's window. Russ Crow does an amazing job there. And you can see from this picture there is some pink on these pods. I will say this variety's coloration is really, really dependent on sunshine. If the pods are in the shade, they are more likely to have less of that pink coloration. If those pods are in the sun, they will turn an intense pink color. The flavor on these beans is one of the best I've ever had. It's part of why I continue to grow them. There is another pink potted bean on the market called Red Swan, and it is a variety that I've grown before. The pods on it were not nearly as big as the Tanyas that you see here, and the flavor on the Red Swan was not one that I was very fond of. That's why I don't grow it anymore. The Tanya's pink pod, though, the flavor is what keeps me coming back to this variety in particular. So, ice was a bean variety that I stumbled across when I was digging through the vast number of bean varieties on a bean collector's window. And this one sounded very, very intriguing. Technically, this is classified as a wax bean, but as you can see from this picture, it is not a yellow bean, and it's not really a green bean either. It's almost a white bean. And this picture really doesn't do it justice. They look a lot greener in this picture than they do in real life. They really are just a really light, pale green color. And this variety is quite short. As you can see from this picture, they really didn't get any bigger than like 3 or 4 inches long. This variety is also a stringed variety, which means you have to pop off the head and pull the little string all the way down, pop off the tail and pull the string off the other side as well. This one ended up being a semi-runner or half runner, as some people call them, which I have mentioned are not my favorite kind of fresh eating bean. However, with this variety, the unique coloration of this bean combined with the flavor. The flavor is unlike any bean I've ever had. Intensely sweet, almost a cucumber flavor to these beans. It is unlike anything I've ever had. Phenomenal. And because of the flavor alone, I will grow this bean again. This has just exceeded my expectations in terms of flavor, and they produced like crazy. They produced so many beans, I could not keep up with picking them at all. This is definitely one that was one of my favorite beans overall the entire gardening season. Crystal Wax is another variety that I got from a bean collector's window. This one was part of their network program, which is where they send out seeds to growers and you grow them and then you send seed back to help keep the stock on that seed variety up so that these varieties don't get lost. And in the description for this one, it was indicated that it might be the same as the ice bean. So I decided to grow these simultaneously to kind of do a comparison. And these two beans are quite similar. As you can see from the picture, the same coloration. This one showcases that light, not quite green color, a little better than the picture of the ice bean. Crystal Wax ended up being about a week earlier than ice and produced slightly more beans, not anything so significant that it's worth making a decision one over the other. And I did notice with Crystal Wax, it tended to have more variation in color of flowers than the ice. The ice was very consistently yellow bean flowers. Crystal Wax had mostly yellow. There were a couple white and pink flowers that showed up in there, as well as a couple actually green beans. So my conclusion on this is Crystal Wax is a strain of ice that's just been selected over the years, maybe had some cross breeding happen either intentionally or unintentionally. Again, another very fun variety, exact same flavor as the ice. And it was very, very fun to grow. So now we get to where I tell you what varieties I enjoyed the most, what varieties I am going to grow going forward. And I want to give this information with the caveat that my opinions on what beans are the best are based on what is best for my garden and my family. Now, I might say that this bean had a really good flavor and this bean had a really bad flavor. And in my garden, that's true. In your garden, it may be the opposite because there are so many factors, such as the weather and your soil and your growing environment, your zone. So take all of these results with a grain of salt and know that even though I say I didn't like a bean, it doesn't mean that that bean may not work for you and may not be your favorite. This is just my opinion on what kind of beans did well in my garden and what kind of attributes and flavors and growing habits that we're looking for in our garden. So for green beans, we had the two varieties, Zumbro Falls and Top Crop. Just to reiterate, Zumbro Falls did not produce as much as Top Crop, but Zumbro Falls had what I considered to be a superior flavor overall. Top Crop produced a load of beans and the flavor was very good. Biggest drawback on that was they didn't fit into my bean slicer so that I could make our fried green bean dish. So with these two beans, I ended up being undecided on which one I preferred over the other. They seem to have a fairly equal amount of pros and cons. So I will be growing these beans out again this year in 2024. I do have a couple other green bean varieties that I'm going to throw into the mix and try out. However, it was a really tough call on these two, and I wasn't really able to make a decision on picking one over the other. So for wax beans, we ended up with 7 varieties. Goldenrod definitely came out ahead in terms of color. It was by far the most yellow variety here. Flavor was okay. Production was pretty good. Cherokee wax has been my standby for many years. Compared to some of the other varieties I grew this year, the coloration just wasn't great. Flavor is pretty good, and production really was pretty average. Kishwaukee yellow was one of the more yellow varieties, definitely the standout producer of all the beans, and the flavor was quite nice. Rocquencourt coloration was just not there. They weren't really yellow. and they were a very delicate bean, and production wasn't great. Pencil pod, very similar to Cherokee wax. Production was actually a little lower than the Cherokee wax. Coloration was about the same, and flavor was pretty average. The Rocquencourt coloration just wasn't up to what the package showed. Flavor was not great, and production overall was not great either. Gold Rush had really good production. The color wasn't quite where I wanted it, and I just wasn't a fan of the flavor on those. So for wax beans, Kishwaukee came out as definitely a winner in this regard. This decision was one of the hardest of all of the beans. I've grown Cherokee wax for many years. I've really enjoyed growing it, and it really broke my heart for it to fall so far behind some of the other varieties. So for wax beans, Kishwaukee is going to be our variety going forward. As I mentioned, it has the 3 different seed coats. It had a mottled brown and black, a black, and a beige kind of coloration. And still trying to decide if we're going to just plant out whatever seed we get or if I'm going to start selecting for a certain seed color. Overall, though, Kishwaukee was definitely the winner in the wax bean category. So for purple beans, we ended up with 6 varieties. I'm going to put Celine almost in a subcategory of its own just because it is a purple wax bean, not a purple green bean. It was quite nice. The coloration was nice. Flavor was nice. Production was not great. And added to the fact that it's a filet bean, it makes me hard to like this variety, but the uniqueness of it definitely intrigues me as well. Amethyst definitely came out bottom of the pack here. Coloration just wasn't there. Flavor wasn't there. Production wasn't there. We got lots of warped beans. This one definitely was bottom of the pack for the purple beans. Purple Teepee had great color, great flavor, great production, a little bit warped in terms of bean shape, but overall, a very nice bean. Velour has been my long-term standby for the purple beans. When comparing it to some of the other varieties I grew this year, the coloration just wasn't where I would really like it to be. Production is still amazing on this bean, but with being a filet bean, having that long, delicate bean rather than some of the beefier beans that we had, it just didn't stack up in terms of overall production when it came to some of the other varieties. Royal Burgundy, the color is not quite what I'm going for, though it is a very nice, consistent color. Production was great, but flavor just wasn't a great fit for me. The Purple King, the half runner growth habit definitely threw me off. Coloration and pod size and flavor just weren't there on that one for me as well. So this was a very hard choice to narrow this certain set down. Purple Teepee definitely took the cake in the purple bean category. Just the flavor, growth habit, and coloration came out above the other ones. When it came to Celine, like I said, it's a unique enough variety that I'm willing to give it a little bit of grace, and I am going to grow it again in 2024 and see if we can get some better results with it. Now we get down to the oddball beans. This doesn't seem like a very fair comparison, as these beans are all very different. The biggest comparison here is going to be between the ice and the crystal wax. Tanya's pink pod is a very unique bean. I enjoy the flavor very much. Like I said, the coloration sometimes is there and sometimes isn't. It's very, very dependent on the amount of sunshine those pods get, but the flavor really does keep me coming back to that variety. When we get down to ice and crystal wax, the similarities were so striking that I really do believe crystal wax is just a strain of the ice that's been selected out over the course of many years. So we really are just comparing which one I preferred of the ice and the crystal wax. So as I said, Tanya's keeps me coming back for the flavor and the unique coloration. Definitely will be growing it again next year. When it came down to ice and crystal wax, because the crystal wax showed more variation in flowers, and pod set, I leaned more toward the ice just because of the stability of its genetics. Another interesting thing I had happen with the ice variety is I actually had a couple plants that produced a second crop. And this was very out of the norm across the board for ice and crystal wax. I ended up saving some seeds from those plants to try again next year. I would love to develop a strain of this where you could get two crops off of this variety. The flavor's phenomenal. The unique coloration is great. Despite them being a semi runner and a string bean, I am definitely going to continue to grow this variety. So there you have it, guys. The quest for the greatest bean. Again, these are all opinions based on my garden, my family, my growing zone. And I hope that this inspires you to go out and try these varieties on your own. Like I said, my favorite bean may be the bean you hate the most, and the bean I hated the most may be the one you love. So I hope that you found this interesting. I hope you found this informative, and I hope that you can go out and take this information and try growing some of these varieties yourself and find those new standbys that you will grow again and again over the years. Thank you all for watching. I hope to see you again soon.